welcome to each of you in the KVEC region. Those of you that are new special education teachers, welcome KVEC staff and any of our partners that have joined us today. This is our second new and emerging teacher cadre, and today we're going to talk about writing present levels, and we're going to talk about how we use that information to move into goal writing. And we have our folks that from KVEC that are going to share about goal writing. We want you to know that just feel free to stop us, to join in the conversation, to ask questions, and just to be part of this, an informal way for us to share information, but for you to be able to get some new learning and meet the team at KVEC and know that we're here to support you, and we're glad that you're part of our special ed community in this region. Turn it over right now to Denny Paul May, and he is our due process consultant, and he's going to share with you some information around present levels.
Okay, so welcome everyone. It's good to be here. So what we have here is just a screen capture or a screen grab or whatever you want to call it. A screenshot of our IEP coaching tool. And then you also have the things that the components or the items that we're looking for when we review a file in regards to meeting compliance for our present level writing. And so there are 4 areas that we continually refer to as the areas that we have to see evidence in each of these areas in order for your present level to be compliant. And so within our IEP coaching tool, we've arranged it so that you've got a checkbox beside of each one of those areas. And when we talk about the areas, the big areas that we talk about lots of times, ones that are more frequently used or referred to are going to be your academic performance, your social emotional. Sometimes you're going to see things in the health section, and then we're going to lots of times see things in the general intelligence. So what we were talking about here is we have, and the reason I grabbed this piece of the screen, that you can see communication status being the first one in the line on that first page of the present levels, first page of the IEP. We've got in the gray box there some considerations for marking commensurate with similar age peers. Now, first of all, if we're brand new to this, we need to understand what commensurate means. And commensurate simply means that you're in a similar age expected range of performance. So you're going to be in a similar age expected range. It doesn't really equate to being on grade level. It doesn't really equate to being exactly the same, but if you're commensurate, you're on what we call expected performance in a similar age comparison. And so when we look at that, we would see that you know, if you're talking about a student being commensurate in a particular area, you could mark the box. You could say the performance is commensurate with similar age peers. See how that's written? It's in a similar age range where you would be your expected your performance would be close to the expected similar age performance. And so you could go ahead and mark that as commensurate. Now, if you do not, if you're writing a goal, you do not need to check this box, because they are not. If you're not going to write a goal, you do not need to check this box because you're not commensurate. If you're not commensurate, then you're going to have several things. These things on the left, you're going to be responsible for. So if we have an area like academic performance, and we know that the student is MMD, mild mental disability, then we're going to see that we're going to have information in regards to the strengths, the needs, or concerns, the student performance data, and we've got baseline and supporting test scores there in parentheses, because that all goes in together, and then the adverse effect. And in our coaching tool, Dion, if you want to go on to the next slide. Well, Dion put this little video in here. I like this. This is kind of cool. So there's the present levels. Here's the areas. Here are the areas that we're talking about. And we know that we have to have strengths around skills. We have needs or concerns identified, and we also have the baseline and the supporting test scores. We also have to talk about progress data if it's a particular. You can go on to the next slide, Dion, if you want. We're also going to have to talk about supporting scores, and we're also going to have to mention progress data if it's a subsequent IEP, if the kid's been in the program more than 1 year. So as we think about this, we have to make sure as we're reading through that we see evidence of strengths, needs, and we prioritize their needs, and we say what those needs are academically. If it's reading comprehension, what is it causing the problem in reading comprehension? And then we're going to develop a baseline around that information. And then from that, then we're going to write a goal. And in adverse effect, when you're thinking about adverse effect, the record review says to write adverse effect, you have to tell how the disability impacts the student's performance. And how does that show that the student needs specially designed instruction? You also have to, beyond that, you have to have a comparison of the age expected performance from the standards on that particular academic area. And you have to be able to say, well, here's where the baseline is for this student. That's why it's so important that we develop a baseline percentage or number around those needs or those skills that are deficient, so that we can then write a goal. That's our starting point. And so it's going to be very, very important as we think about this, that we're not just writing anything in there. We're going to write strengths. We're going to write strengths in a way that they are going to be related to the learning. And, it's okay to include some additional strengths, but we need strengths around those skills. For example, if reading is the issue and reading comprehension is the problem, reading fluency might be the issue for this student, but they may be able to call letters or call words really, really well. So that would be a strength in that area that we could accentuate as we teach them. We know that they can call words. We know that they can read words, basic sight words, but can they read a whole sentence and comprehend it? So when we think about developing our present levels, we need to think about developing them around those academic areas, and to make sure that we're making those strengths and those needs balance out, and that we're talking about academic pursuits, or we're talking about functional pursuits or adaptive pursuits, whatever present level we're working on, that it's related to that area. And then when you're looking at student performance data, we put that in a big old
on this googly me.
We put that in a whole big category, and we look at MAP scores. We might look at CERT data. We may look at a lot of things that are given, at particular times in the year. And that gives us an idea of what areas these students are going to be deficient in. We may look at current psychological test data. We may look at progress data from a subsequent IEP. And all of that goes under there. And then from that, we've got to decide what skill is it that's going to move this student from their performance where they are right now, closer to that age expected performance. And that's really what that whole thing is about. This IEP, in an overall sense, we are going to establish that we're going to close gaps academically. We're going to provide access to the general curriculum. But we have to write goals to meet the student where they are. And that's why we have to have baseline. Now, the number one thing that I would say to remember here is these 4 things have to be present. And if we read your present level and we don't see baseline percentages and we don't see those words, it's really easy if you'll just write those words. This is the kid's relative strength in this particular area. This is the student's priority need in reading. And here is the baseline. This is the adverse effect. And we've told how the disability causes those adverse effects to be present and what the residual effect of it is. So if a student has verbal comprehension issues in general intelligence, that may translate in an adverse effect to them not being able to read multisyllabic words at the high school level. So that's the residual effect of the intelligence. And so those are the things that we need to think about. But we need to make sure that we've got numbers with baseline associated with those discrete skills that are going to then turn into goals. So now let's move over and talk about just really briefly about the components of the goal. So we can advance up to the goal development slide, Dion, if you
Okay.
don't care.
Before we transition, Denny, I wanted to say that I like this slide when we think about that present levels and what those requirements are, because I like the way you've gotten it laid out. It almost is like a check that helps us to keep in our mind straight all of those required pieces for each one of those areas. When we know that a child is not commensurate with their other peers, it's almost, as a new teacher, a good checklist or a good way to make sure that every single time when I develop my present level, I include all 4 pieces of this information. So I like that, and I like the way that that looks. Just for me as a teacher and as a special ed teacher, it was very helpful for me to organize and remember all of those pieces if it was laid out in a format like that.
And I think, Dion, that's a great point. And I'll just add this really quickly. I think sometimes we get in a hurry to get all this done and we forget to read back through it. And what we need to do is get ourselves in the cognitive habit of reviewing our present levels a little bit and just see if we can identify strengths. See how we have it broken down. We're talking about strengths in one paragraph. We're having it broken down. We talk about needs in another paragraph. If you can organize yourself that way and use this checklist, I think it'll be very helpful. And then also reading back through that information to make sure that you can identify the baseline, the adverse effect, the needs, concerns, and the strengths. And I really think that will help. And I really appreciate those comments, Dion, because that really helps give us some perspective. And so go right ahead.
I'm just going to say that's just a strategy that I have that helps me. But I even have a little Post-it note. And as I read back through, I just take my little Post-it note that looks just like your Post-it note on this page, and to make sure every time I'm getting that information. So
I tried to make that Post-it note look like your October with the orange and the brown and all that. So anyway, I'm getting better at this technology stuff. I'm a work in progress. Okay, so just really quickly, how this translates. The big way it translates is we know that we're going to set a percentage. We're going to set a percentage as a target for a particular student. We're going to know that that student in that circumstance is on a particular instructional level. If we're talking about writing a goal for reading, we're going to know that they might be on the 5th grade instructional level, and that's where we really have to meet them. And we're going to try to take them to the 6th grade instructional level. So we might write that goal. And I've heard Brenda say this many, many times. And, we need to think about, if they're on the 5th grade, are we going to take them to the 6th grade? How are we going to do that? And so we have to meet them where they are. We got to write that circumstance on that particular instructional level. And then we would look at the student's name being in place. So we'd talk about that circumstance being how we set up that situation where the student's behavior is going to be monitored or going to be viewed, or we're going to take progress on it. And then we're going to see the behavior. We're going to see the student's name is the audience. Okay, so we'd say the circumstance. So we might say the student's has been given a reading passage on the 5th grade instructional level, and his name is John, and John will read and answer comprehension questions 90% of the, or 80% of the time, let's just say 80% of the time, on 4 out of 5 consecutive trials. So that's going to be your percentage, your degree, your criterion. And then we're going, and this is where we really run into some trouble sometimes. You have a drop-down box on Infinite Campus, and you have choices. You have 4 choices for method of measurement. And it's like in a little gray box now, I think, on Infinite Campus. And you'll have curriculum-based measures, direct measures, indirect measures, and authentic measures. And so you need to choose one measure, either direct measure or a curriculum-based measure. Now, with this academic stuff, lots of times we'll just use curriculum-based measures. And for the E part, we'll put probes in. And then our frequency of data collection tells us how often the teacher is going to collect the data on this measurable annual goal. How often are we going to chart it? How often are we going to put it in Infinite Campus on the data, on the goal collection tab? And so we might say weekly, or we might say twice monthly, or we might say monthly. I say that, to really see behavioral change and to really see trends and to really, really be able to effectively progress monitor, most goals need to be weekly. I'll say most, I'm not going to say all. Now, the other thing that you would think about is if you're switching and you're going to do a direct measure. So you would choose direct measure, And then you would embed a particular tool like a duration recording, which would record how long a behavior lasts. Or you might record an event recording, or so where you're counting the number of times in the event recording would go under that particular evaluation method of measurement. So your teacher's measuring the student progress toward reaching the measurable annual goal, but you're choosing a tool. Now we say with curriculum-based measures, we're always going to choose probes as our word to put in there. But if we go to direct measures, we may have to do duration recording or event recording. And then are we going to do in a percentage? What are we doing? What are we measuring? Lots of times what we're seeing problems with, people try to put too many behaviors in, or they don't embed the tool. And so I'm going to leave it at that, and we can move on. I think Miss Stephanie's up next, if I'm right. I might be wrong. Thank you, guys.
Before we start with Stephanie, does anyone have any questions about what Danny Paul just talked about around, talking about the present levels, knowing what those 4 components are that we need in each of those present levels, and then understanding what we need in all of those components in the goal writing. So let's just stop right there and make sure anybody don't want to ask a question or make a comment about that. So let me just give you all just a minute, and then we're going to turn it over to Stephanie.
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
When we're writing the present levels, is it okay, like as we're getting started, to even just list like these are the strengths, needs, student performance, adverse effect, as we're getting started, to make sure that we have those things in there?
Dion, you want to answer that, or you want me to answer that?
You go ahead if you want to. Right?
Okay. So I'm just thinking, when we're reviewing your file, we use the record review document, and we're looking for evidence of that. And so those areas are going to, some of it's going to require a lot of data, and some of it is going to be a little shorter in nature. The strengths may not be as long, but I would say, if that helps you to make sure you've got it all in there, that's fine. But we're just looking for evidence that those 4 pieces are there, and they've been done with fidelity, and there's numbers attached to them. And so that we can say that baseline is going to lead to that goal that we write. That baseline, like we would say, okay, if the kid's on the 5th grade instructional level, and right now he can answer comprehension questions with inferencing at 20% of the time. Okay. But we know in order to move him, we got to move him to about 80 or 90% over this next year. So we've just got to see that there's information there that's going to check off on that rubric that we use, which is called the record review document. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. We appreciate that you asked that question, because I think that it helps us just to process that and try to think about, how do we organize it in our way if we're new to this process, and how does it help us keep organized and keep our information together? So I think that's a great question. All right, Stephanie, are you with us? And
I am.
Okay, I'm gonna mute and turn it over to you.
Okay, so where do I begin in mathematics? Well, we always know that we've got math screeners that are out there. We talk about the MAP testing that's done from year to year, and usually that's done at least 3 times a year, sometimes just twice, but you have that data to pull from. You also may have like a math dibbles, those kind of things that you're using in your districts. Now, another thing that we want to look at always is your progress data. Whatever progress data you have, that's a good way to start your baseline, as Danny Paul was talking about, because you've got that progress data and you know where they ended at or where they need to begin at for the next thing. So Miss Dion, this is where we begin. Can you advance whoever's doing the slides? All right. So we've got little John here, and little John has some issues, as we can tell, and he's supposed to be a 3rd grader, but he's working a little bit less than 3rd grade at this point. He's actually on a kindergarten level. So we're kind of concerned for him because he's not crossing the decade with numbers. He's having some issues with recounting. There was a couple of things that I would like to add to this to make this a really good present level. One would be that line for adverse effect, but we know that he's not supervising numbers, and that's part of the adverse effect that he's going to have, because to be in third grade, he needs to understand numbers, and he's far behind on that one. We have some information about the MAP testing in there. We also have his scores for his screener that actually says he's on the kindergarten level. So we know where little John is at this point, and we know that looking back at the standards, a big section that we need is fluency, and we also need number sense. So for where he is at in third grade, we would actually continue on, and we would look at our standards, and we would say, what's he needing the most in? And so at that point, for little John, Dion, if you can move on.
Okay. Stephanie, I also wanted to say in the chat, I think there are some folks may be having a little bit of trouble hearing you. If you don't care to just talk up just a little bit more, maybe
Okay.
turn your volume up. All right. Thank you.
So this is one of the screeners for little John. He is actually, as you can see, this is a screener that we do. This is from Forefront Education. It's a really good one. You can do these screeners, and what I suggest is if you know the level the student's on already, that you start there. But if not, go ahead and start with the grade level they're on, and then move backward if they can't complete them. And then you'll get the actual grade level they are currently on. So he's having trouble in kindergarten. As we can see, he's got some issues going, especially where you see the ones. So counting to 30, he's still having trouble there. He was actually able to read numbers, so he can read, but he's not counting. And that's kind of interesting, but he was not able to go past 20. So we noticed that. I went ahead and went to 20, but then when I asked him to read numbers past 20, he was not able to do that. We also notice on this that he's not organizing his thinking. So he may have some issues with organization skills, which really play into mathematics. And we may discuss that in the present level. The other thing that you're going to see is when he's adding, he is adding correctly, but he's still having some trouble with subtraction. So he's not got both of those. And so this is where we start to talk about, and then at the bottom, he says has trouble organizing materials, and he uses his fingers. So I try to put as many notes as I can when I'm doing screeners, so that when I'm talking to the parent, I can say, these are the things that they're doing. And I can go back to those notes and make a mental note for myself to make sure that I'm talking about the things in the IEP also that he may be having trouble with, like the organizational skills that he's having. So this is his screener, Dion. Now, the reasons I like screeners is because when I go back and I put all this in, or actually before I even start, with this screener that I'm looking at right here, it tells you exactly what to say. So there is nothing left out on what you're supposed to say to the student. There's nothing added. You just have them to walk through this, and that's it. Usually it takes about 5 minutes per kid, no more than 10. And when we're finished with this, I've got a pretty good idea what that student can do on that grade level. Now, that for the Forefront screeners, and I'm not pitching this to anybody, they are free. They also have a mid-year and an end of the year screener. So, and I would suggest using those if you've got some kind of screeners like Dibbles or the Forefront or whatever you're using, that you may want to give those actually more than that, just to have an understanding of how far your students achieved by the end of certain 9 weeks. Okay, must be on. Now, there's a written part to the screener. And so I have him to try to do parts of the written part, and we notice that he's still having some trouble, and definitely subtraction is an area of concern. And so I'm making a mental note of that to talk about that, especially in the present level and with the parent. Next thing. So I go back and I look at the standards, what's next? Like I said, I'm looking at number sense and fluency. And I know that within kindergarten, he's adding and subtracting within 5. But for first grade, the fluency standard says that he's adding and subtracting within 20. So we want to make sure that he is able to do this. And so that's where we're going to start, is we're going to look at that add and subtract within 20. And I'm specifically going to look for subtraction. And so that's where our goal will begin. And so in this case, he's going to perform when we're writing this goal, I'm looking for subtractions, and he's going to perform within 20, right? So any numbers that's going to be within 20. And then we're going to look at 80% accuracy. Of course, we're going to do math probes or teacher made tests, whichever one you may choose at this point. And we're going to measure that weekly. And so that's where, and I suggest to anybody with students, especially when they're struggling, not to go past 10 problems, because it's a lot. And sometimes they'll sit there for quite a while to try to get through those 10 problems, and it can cause frustration. So if you're measuring goals, I strongly suggest staying within that 10 problem range. Okay, so if everybody will, just like I said, read over this real quickly. Think about where Miss Keisha is. She's a 7th grader. And think about what she's struggling with and what could be a goal for her. So there's her screener that we did. And this is a 6th grade screener. It's not a 7th grade, but that's okay because she's still struggling.
So Stephanie, if I look at this screener and I see that the score is 1 in all of those areas, then
Yeah,
I know.
One on the commit screeners means that student was not successful. So
Right.
a 1 is not successful and a 2 is partial success. And that's when I really put in some information, like I write in the comments. Basically, I write some comments on the side of it or on the back of it, just so that I have that information. And then a 3 means, yes, I was completely successful. I did it very fluently most of the time. And fluent, this is another thing that most people don't understand, is fluent means I have a strategy and I can work through that, right? It doesn't mean that it has to come with speed. Fluent means that I have a strategy, I work through it, I get a correct answer. I do want them to have some speed, but that's automaticity. That's when the automaticity comes in, when they have that speed and they just know it. You know, there's a big difference between that, but fluent means I have a strategy and I can explain that strategy to you. And then here's a course of Keisha's map scores that she has. So considering that Keisha is in the 7th grade at this point, I would definitely be wanting to work on either fractions or decimals. Because that's one of the things for here on out she's going to need, right? She's going to need some fractions, decimals. She still needs to understand addition and subtraction, and you can use the addition and subtraction within fractions and decimals. So that may be a goal that you might want to consider for her. I don't think we're getting anybody to participate in the chat, Ms. Dion. So if you can move on.
Hey, Steph, could I ask a quick question? With these screeners, do they have probes built in with them with the program so that you can, or do you have to create your own probes? Because those probes are going to have to be given more frequently than the screener. I just wanted to connect that for a second. Why don't you speak about that a little bit?
Well, like I said, the screeners are just something so I can get an understanding of where along the line in that grade level that they are. So I would use those screeners basically to determine what grade level that student's really on. I know we get the white and those kind of things, but those are only done every 3 years. So I need to know, is that child making progress, correct? I want to know, did they make progress in the grade level from where they started? So the white may say that Keisha at the time that she did the white was on, let's say a 3rd grade level. And so if she was on a 3rd grade level, or actually she'd probably be on a 2nd grade level at that point in time, I want to know, did she improve? Has she improved in her mathematics? And this way I can actually go down and, like I said, give the screeners all the way down if I needed to.
Right. And
we could see that she's actually now on a 4th grade level. Even though she's in 7th grade, she has improved. She's now on the 4th grade level.
Right. And so yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So those screeners help us that way. They also help us to know, has she improved? Like if you do the mid-year, has she improved any in that grade level? Because if I give her, let's say the 4th grade level, and that's where she's at, I want to go ahead and give her the mid-year 4th grade level screener. And then I'm going to give her the spring one. So I know if she's definitely continued to make progress.
Great answer. That if we can think about it like this, and with this analogy, probes are like a temperature check, and these screeners would be like a doctor's appointment. Okay, so you're going to do it less frequently, like you're going to go to the doctor less frequently, but you may take your temperature every day.
Yeah, it's kind of like blood pressure. You know, if you think about your blood pressure, you probably take it daily, but for the doctor, you know, you only go every three months. So you want to make sure everything's fine and dandy, but let's make sure that, you know, if we're doing probes weekly, like we should be, those probes are definitely set up around just that goal I'm working on. But I need to know when she's also in that regular math classroom, what is she getting out of that too? Especially if I'm doing some coaching or I'm doing co-teaching in the classroom, I want to make sure that she's getting everything in there and she's building on her skills.
That's a great answer. And I think continuing on with this thinking, we have to keep in mind that when we do probes, to do progress monitoring correctly, we have to use the same method of measurement. So if the method of measurement changes from the screener to the probe, then we've got to establish baseline with the probe tool. And I'll just leave it at that.
Hey, so I'm Chastity Craft. I'm a literacy consultant, and I'm going to talk about the reading goals with just kind of goes along the same with what Stephanie had said and Denny Paul. When you go to write a reading goal, then of course you have to determine where they are and what discrete skill. You want to try to focus on what skill they are lacking and write your goal for that skill. And in order to do that, of course, you have to get some baseline data with screeners and probes and things like that, just like you would do math or behavior or writing or anything that you wanted to assist your students in. Okay, so the screeners for reading that we have, the first one is called the PAST assessment, and that stands for Phonological Awareness Skills Test. That is for mostly it's for younger students. Teachers who teach the primary are more familiar with those, but also if you teach older kids that have reading difficulties, you still could use this on your older students as well to see if they have those foundational skills. It would be really interesting to see what they have mastered and what they haven't, just on phonological awareness. It would kind of be surprised, because I was. A lot of times if you have students who have trouble with reading, if you go and do these screeners, you'll find out that it goes all the way back to those foundational pieces that they missed. So that's why you give those screeners. So you have a PAST assessment for that. And then you have a quick phonics screener, which is what it says. It assesses their phonics or letter sounds. And then the bottom one is it has vocabulary, phonics, all different. This one is pretty phenomenal, actually. And it has probes, and it explains how you can go through and determine the 5 components of reading and see which skill that your student would need, if it's fluency or vocabulary or any of those. So that's where you would start first to see what they would need. So in our example, we're going to talk about John again. He also he's a 3rd grader who he's struggling in reading and writing. He reads at a 1st grade level and has difficulty putting letter sounds together into words and answering comprehension questions. And he can't spell words phonetically, and that impacts his ability to express himself in writing. But he can copy from the board. Okay, so with that being said, let's look at his performance data. John was given the DRA, and he can read 90% with 90% accuracy, the first 300 5-word list. He progressed on the DRA from a level 2 to a level 8, which is kindergarten range to mid 1st grade. He has mastered his letter sound correspondence, so he does know those. And he is just beginning to blend phonemes and segment those. And then you can see the short and vowel sounds is at 20%, and then the consonant blends is at 30%. Based on that information, what would be something that he would need to work on, that we would need to focus with this one? So he does know his letters and sounds. So he doesn't, he doesn't need help with that. He does have difficulty with the blends, and he cannot, with that difficulty, he's not able to blend words. So he's just beginning to do that. So what we would focus on would be blending. blending words on that. Now, when we're looking at those, we have to look at our Kentucky academic standards when we're going to write a goal and how that connects back to, it's written for the kid with their skill, but it has to relate to your academic standard. This one goes back to, if, as you can see here, it's the kindergarten and first grade goal. Even though John is in third, he is not on the third grade level. So we want to go back to those. When we're looking at blending sounds and words, then it goes back to the phonological awareness piece in your standards. So as you look at these, then you can look at that progression, those guiding principles in your standards, that you can quickly see the related content in the grade level. So it's going to be under the reading foundational skills in standard 2. And in this case, he's within the foundational standard. He's not mastered it. So that's where we would go to write our goal. Since he lacks the ability to produce those words by blending sounds, and that's what we were going to work on. But when we go down to write the goal, because I was looking at the standard, then you go down to write our goal, and then we've kind of color coded, I kind of followed Stephanie's suit, that you can see that we have incorporated all of the A, B, C, D, E, and F that Denny and Paul talked about earlier to write a goal for John. So this is how we're going to use the blending checklist, and we're going to measure it twice a week, and we're going to have him blend 8 out of 10 one-syllable words with 3 to 5 sounds. So Keisha is a 7th grader, and she is able to decode accurately in isolation, but it takes her a long time to read at grade level. She can read short phrases and word to word, but when it comes to full passages at a 6th grade level, she reads too quickly and makes guesses. So as a consequence, she makes numerous errors due to incorrect vowel choice and or neglect of middle or end sound parts. So with Keisha, let's look at her data. She scored the 119 words per minute at the 5th grade level. And so she's a 7th grader. So she's scoring at the 5th grade level. And in the winter benchmark for 119 words in the winter is at the 25th percentile in 5th grade. So she's a 7th grader. She can decode 7th grade words with 50% accuracy. And with her reading, the CDM for reading comprehension is that she can answer inferential comprehension questions at a 30% accuracy when she independently reads. But then when it's read to her, she answers it with 80% accuracy. So based on that information, what do you think her weakness would be, or what skill do you think we need to focus on? Keisha has a fluency weakness. So that would be something that we would want to target first with Keisha. So then going and then looking at your standards, tying it back to your standard. Then you have the 5th grade. So she was at the 25th percentile in the 5th grade. So we're going to look at the 5th grade, and it's read fluency on grade level to support comprehension. So that would be something that you would tie into your goal. And then you can use that to write a goal. So this will be an example of a goal for Keisha. So you're giving her a 5th grade passage. She will read fluently 195 words a minute as measured with a fluency probe, because we are looking at fluency. And this takes her 195 words per minute, takes her to the 90th percentile in the 5th grade. So that would still be a growth for her, still not on grade level, but you're making progress for her and it's attainable. So that's something that you want to keep in mind also when making the goals for these kids.
Let's get back over there. Chastity, thank you so much. I think that the process that you just talked about and how we break those skills down, and then we look at the standards, and then we identify those areas those discrete skills, just like you were talking about with her fluency. You know, we might, if had we not used all that data, we might have just jumped in and just wrote a comprehension goal, but we didn't understand why we had to have, why the fluency was important in order to help her with comprehension, and how we connect that work back to the standards. So I thought that you done a great job explaining that, and that was very helpful to kind of see that process. And how the thinking is around how do we arrive at what they are pretty good at versus what they need to be working on, and how we use that from that all connects and it makes sense from the present level to the goal writing, and then how we monitor how well students do. So thank you for sharing that.
And I was going to say really quickly, that's also that information, the way she laid that out there, some of that information that speaks about how they do a high percentage and do it well, that can be a strength relative to their reading and where they are. So you can look at that, and then it can help guide your SDI as well.
Thank you all. I think now we'll move on over. We're going to use the same example of Keisha, and we're going to let Doug talk about what that would look like if we write a behavior goal for Keisha. So we'll turn it over to Doug Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Doug Smith, behavior consultant with KVEC. And we're going to look at Keisha. Now, one thing that we forgot to mention with Keisha, Keisha is also ADHD. So when we look at this scenario that we have with Keisha, it says when presented a task, Keisha has to be prompted to attempt task several times by teacher. After some minutes, she starts the task. She is then able to maintain effort for 10 minutes before she begins to fidget at her desk, play with her pencil, and look around the room. The teacher then has to prompt Keisha to return to task many times. Again, after a few minutes, Keisha returns to task with sustained effort for 10 minutes. So just me thinking about it, Keisha is a 7th grade kiddo with ADHD. I mean, 10 minutes sitting still and on task was pretty decent at this time, I would think. So, and some data that we obtained was by using a latency recording form. And latency recording is how long does it take before the student performs the task that you ask them to do from the time that you ask them. So if I give Keisha instructions or give her directions, how many minutes or how many seconds, how long does it take before she complies with that command or that demand and gets on task? So, and this is an example of a latency recording, data recording sheet. You put down, how many trials, the first trial, what time did I give the instruction or direction, then what time did she actually get on task, and then to determine how many minutes lapsed between the time that you provided them with that instruction or that direction and the time that they got started. So this is an example of a latency data recording sheet. And if we look back at Keisha, we saw that it takes an average of 3 minutes to start task. So if I ask her to read a passage, she sits there and plays with her pencil, looks around the room, fidgets for 3 minutes before she actually starts. But then it is only after several prompts are given her. So an event recording or frequency recording form is just what it says. You put a check mark or a tally mark for however many times you have to prompt the kid or have to give them a reminder to get on task or to get to work. So, and it could be, getting on task behaviors. It could be to stop a behavior. Just how many times does it take you asking that kiddo to comply before they start complying or doing what you ask them to do? So if we look back at Keisha, we determined that it takes on average 4 times before she starts to get on task. So she's sitting there for 3 minutes looking around the room, and then you have to continuously ask her 4 times to get on task. I would think those would, from looking at this information, we may want to do a goal for time on task. But like I said, ADHD, I think 10 minutes of sustained effort is pretty good baseline. So I would address either the how long does it take her to get on task, or how many times do I have to prompt her? Now, one thing, and if we go to the next one, think about that and the example that we read. So with the first one, when given a task or direction, she'll begin task within 1 minute with no more than 2 prompts. on 8 of 10 independent tasks as measured by latency recording form 3 times a week. Now, I would think with the other one, as far as how many prompts you have to give her, as the more that you work on that relationship building and work on those skills with Keisha, and you become more familiar with her, she becomes more familiar with you, then those things may drop without even having to write a goal about prompts. Because if you build that relationship, then they're more likely to do what you ask them in a shorter amount of time, or with fewer prompts. And then it could also be a thing where we come up with a signal that we give Keisha to get on task, and that way we don't have to continuously talk to her about it. It could be just point to the desk, an environmental prompt, just point to the desk, show her a piece of paper, or just give her a signal or a sign or something like that you and Keisha work out with each other. So depending on your relationship and depending on how patient you are with the kiddos, you can address a lot of that stuff without having to go or out of goal with it. But so that's examples with Miss Keisha. And then of course we saw 3 times a week as far as how often we're going to gather data. I think with some behavior goals, you may want to gather data daily. That way you can do a progress monitor that strategy that you're using to see if it's having the impact that you want it to have.
Doug, I was going to ask, on the screen, we've shared 2 different examples of a goal. And I like the way that you shared what that looks like if you're using a latency recording form 3 times a week. So we decide what that is, our method of measure. So your goals are both correct. Both are using, however, one is using, they're using different methods of measurement. So I like the way that we can see it's really about what's appropriate for student, right? What you're trying to measure, what tool you're using, what you're trying to measure, and how you progress monitor that. So I like the way that you have those goals up here, and the color. Remember, we talked about those colors that align with how we write a goal, which is the A, B, C, D, E, and F. And so you can go back and you can find each of those components, and that kind of helps give you an idea about how do you have a good solid goal with all those pieces that are compliant. But also I like that it connects back. It just makes sense about how we write a goal based on what the child's present level is, how we use baseline data, and how we make decisions about how we're going to monitor that. Again, I just keep going back to asking that same question. Does it all make sense? Is it all connected? And does that flow? Do I use that present level to drive what I do, how I write that goal? And does that drive the tool I use to measure? And is it getting to what that kid really needs to work on to move them as far as we can? So thank you, Doug.
Hi, yes, I was concerned because I'm new and I'm just beginning to work with the FMD students. And I was wondering if you have to go to the 10th grade level, or do you modify that by going down to the level they're working on? How do you do that? Are you supposed to go to the 10th grade level?
You're going to have standards that are going to be a little bit different for your alternate students. And we're always going to, in present level, when we develop the baseline, we're always going to meet the kid where they are. So we're going to back up to the level that they're working on. And we're going to try to connect, like Chastity and Stephanie said, and Doug, we're going to try to always connect it to the standards. But the standards are a little bit different. They're a little more general. They're not as deep. They're not as broad. And so you need to meet the student where they are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're
If
welcome.
you're working with math, also keep in mind there's the progression in math. And for math, if you actually go back to the standards, there is a section that is coded with reds and blues, and you can actually go backward in the standards. So if that student is not where you're at on that grade level, you can actually take the standard that you're wanting to look at, whether it's number sense or whatever, or algebra, you can actually go backward. So keep that in mind when you're doing that one, that it's a section over there. You'll see the grade level that they're currently on. You'll see a red one that's prior to, and just keep on clicking backward on that one.
Okay,
I think that helps us because we want to look at where the grade level, and then we back up. That's how we kind of figure out what that skill is. That's that backward design of that progression. We kind of figure out what the skill is that they're missing. Like the overall goal for literacy
Okay.
is to be able to read at grade level and comprehend text. But when we go back at the standard, so we might look and see what is it that they're supposed to be able to do at that grade level. And then we have, like Stephanie said, we look at the grade before that, the grade before that, the grade before that. And we try to figure out where they're missing, what the skill is that they're missing, because standards, they just progressively get harder and they demand more out of a student. So we have to figure out where that area is that they need the help on. And like, I'll give you an example. If you're talking about like teaching kids to inference when they're understanding text, 4th or 5th grade, the standards talk about inferencing. But really what that looks like is, can they ask who, what, when, where, and why questions at the 2nd grade level? So if they can't ask questions who, what, when, where, and why, they won't. That's the skill they need. Those are skills that they need to be able to answer, to be able to infer later on. So though, if you use the standards, it gives you a guide. Even if you do have to go back, like Deepa said, and meet them where they're at, you got to think. That helps you to be able to think through, what is it, where are they at? I know if they're at the 2nd grade level, then what is it, the skills that are the most important that I can teach them in order to make them advance as far as we can get them, because we want to take them from where they're at and get them as far as we can in that year. So
okay,
And
As-
I added a link in the chat. It is, it's the Kentucky Alternate Assessment Resources and Literacy. And what that link will take you to a page that we,
oh, thank you.
and it has standards, the alternate assessment standards, and it's
Thank
kind of,
you.
you're welcome. It's broken down, and it kind of gives you some prerequisite skills and some
Okay,
guidance on that. And if you have any additional questions after you go through and look at those, you can email me and ask me about those. So hopefully that'll help you, at
Okay.
least get you somewhere to go to start with.
And I had one more comment I wanted to make too. As a special ed teacher, we have a twofold charge in special ed. One, we're going to close gaps by meeting the student where they are and trying to take them to a similar age expected performance. But the other piece of that is providing accommodations, modifications to provide access to the general curriculum. And so that's so important to keep in mind. And then we throw in, when they become 14, 16, we start thinking through that lens of transition and what they're going to do after high school. So those are big jobs, and we know you got big ones, and we're here for you. And great session today. Thank you all for great questions too.
okay, thank you.
okay, we'll conclude. We're actually a few minutes over, but we'll conclude today's session. We thank each of you for hanging in there with us and joining us.